Tuesday night will be the single most important night before Election Day on November 5th. The ABC debate will likely be the only debate the Kamala campaign will agree to for obvious reasons. Sure, it's going to be a high stakes night for her, but I'd argue the stakes for Donald Trump are much higher. But here is the bittersweet part about it. Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone can decide before the debate even begins if he wants to win it. This is what I mean by that. The moderators are not going to be fair. We might as well stop complaining about it because it should be an accepted reality at this point. We can't change it, and Donald Trump can't change it either. The only thing under Trump's control is the most difficult aspect for him to control: himself. He has to fight every urge to grab at that low-hanging fruit. He has to fight every bone in his body that wants him to take the bait. I know his team says the best thing for Trump is for Trump to be Trump, but I've got to disagree because Trump is winning on pretty much every single issue outside of abortion. How can the candidate that's up on multiple points on all the issues be in a dead heat with an opponent that's down on almost every single one? Well, because it has a lot to do with personality. Don't get me wrong, I love his personality, but like I've said, it doesn't really matter what I love or what you love. It's about winning over people who like his policies, but they might not like his mouth. Honestly, if I were Trump, my strategy would be to talk less and listen more. In fact, if I were Trump, I'd be such a gentleman, I'd yield some of my time to Kamala. After all, America, and likely Kamala herself, doesn't know where she stands on much, so I'd give her all the time in the world to explain it. Let her talk. Let her talk so much that she can't talk anymore. Kamala wants to run the clock. That's her whole campaign strategy, run the clock. They ended Joe so late for that reason. They wanted to leave Kamala with as little time as possible to screw things up. And ironically, kind of like Trump, her own mouth is her biggest obstacle, albeit for very different reasons. So if I were Trump, I would just let her marinate in as many minutes and seconds of dead air as possible. Give her the clock. Tick, tick, tock, Kamala. Joining me now to discuss it all is Truth in Media founder Ben Swann. All right, Ben, what do you think about tomorrow night? What do you think is the best strategy for Donald Trump going in? Because we know Kamala, she's preparing for the debate. She's even got Trump lookalikes standing in to get her ready. So what does Donald Trump need to do?
I think you're exactly right, Tommy. Thanks for having me on. I think you're exactly right. I mean, he can't go for the low-hanging fruit. He can't insult her. He can't call her names. No nicknames the entire time. He needs to leave it alone. He needs to stick to policy only. And as you said, he needs to challenge her on her flip-flopping. He needs to challenge her on her actual positions. He needs to reposition himself in this debate as not the incumbent, because he's not the incumbent. She is the incumbent here. She's been in office for 3.5 years. But amazingly, what she's been able to do with the help of the media and social media, what they've done is they've repositioned her as she's the upstart insurgent candidate, and he's the incumbent whose policies aren't working. Well, she's the incumbent whose policies aren't working, and he's the guy when she says, we don't want to go back. If I were Donald Trump, I would spend the entire night talking about going back to 4 years ago. Not going back 40 years. Let's go back to 4 years ago when you could afford groceries. Let's go back to 4 years ago when you could afford your rent. Let's go back to 4 years ago when a used car wasn't the most expensive thing on the planet. And instead say, how are you, Harris, going to bring us back to that place? Because right now you're in a position to do it and you're not doing anything. And that's where he needs to hit her.
There was a viral clip yesterday, to your point, of Bernie Sanders, which I give Bernie Sanders a lot of credit because at least he's honest. And when asked about Kamala's positions and if he still considers her to be a progressive, he said, in summary, yeah, she's still a progressive, but she's got to be pragmatic and she's got to win the election. All of us know that's exactly what she's doing here. Oh, she doesn't want to ban fracking now, or her campaign says she doesn't want to ban fracking, and she's not for an extreme climate change agenda, and she doesn't want to ban fossil fuels. We know all the things that she wanted to do just back in 2019 and 2020. Suddenly she doesn't want to do anymore, but that's all because she wants to win an election. We know this, but you brought up something, Ben, that I think is important. I'm going to talk about it a little later in one of my segments, but do you think Donald Trump should bring up the fact that 4 years ago, migrants weren't eating ducks and pets in parks in Ohio?
Yeah, absolutely. Or the fact that 4 years ago, you didn't have 3 or 4 square blocks of New York City with thousands of immigrants who were taking it over as if it's a third world country. Or the fact that 4 years ago, you didn't have Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes in Colorado. Or the fact that 4 years ago, you didn't have men who were being turned away from Venezuelan prisons coming back into the country and gang raping children. right? This is the reality of what the Harris-Biden administration has done on the border. And the reality is this: he needs to also challenge her on something JD Vance said. I don't think JD Vance has done a very good job in terms of his ability to speak to the media. I think he's a good candidate for vice president. I think he's been a good senator in Ohio, but he's not media savvy. But one thing he did say, and I'll give him credit for this, he said that Kamala Harris is actually running a more Trump campaign than Trump is right now. She's literally adopted every single one of his policies, including, of all things, the border wall. The fact that she now advocates for finishing the border wall, he's got to go back and quote her. He's got to have quotes from her where I know you can't have notes, but he's got a pretty sharp mind. He can remember them well enough. But quote her on the things she said about the wall and how it was inhumane and it was third world and it was disgusting and it was a violation of human rights. He needs to quote her on those things. He needs to call out the fact that this administration, every single policy that America take, because you said at the beginning, and you're right, on the policy issues, she's losing because no one's happy with this administration's policies. What she's managed to do is disassociate herself from those policies by saying, well, those aren't my policies, those are Biden's policies, and I'm not for any of that stuff. Really? You're not for any of this stuff? You're going to do things completely different? Why were you his running mate if that was the case? And why were you planning up until 2 months ago to be his running mate again for the next 4 years if you disagreed with all of these policies?
I don't really think that Kamala knows where she stands on anything. I think that she's an empty vessel. And I don't often think that of politicians, even on the left. I actually think that they're far more strategic than most Republicans. Gavin Newsom, I think, is more strategic than about any Republican out there. So I don't often say that people are empty vessels, or I don't often say that maybe their intelligence is diminished. But when I watch Kamala, I really do think that she doesn't have a grasp on the issue. She might be smart in other things, but when it comes to policy, I don't think she has a policy mind. I think she says what sounds good to her, and I don't think she really knows one way or another where she stands. And I think that she's easily manipulated, which is exactly why the Obamas wanted Kamala to be the running mate and why the Obamas wanted Kamala to be the current candidate, because she's easily controlled. So there's all that. But I also want to talk about her running mate, Tim Walz. Okay. He's got better favorability than JD Vance. And I think that says something about also JD Vance. He could do a little better. But Tim Walz, man, they think they're going to use him to win over men. How do you think that's going to work out?
No, absolutely not. What Tim Walz has going for him is the same demographic, by the way, that Kamala's pulling, of which are suburban women. Right. That's the group that she needs. That's the group that Biden needed. And it's the group that Tim Walz appeals to. And why? Because Tim Walz comes off as folksy and he comes off as friendly. So if you're going to give him credit for anything, because as a governor, I think you can give him credit for almost nothing. I think he's a horrible governor. He's one of the most oppressive governors in the entire country under COVID. His policies are just nuts. And I think he's nuts. The fact that his entire family came out, by the way, and endorsed Trump with Trump t-shirts is a sign that he's not a good guy. But the fact is this: Tim Walz smiles a lot, and he puts his hand on his heart, and he acts humble, and he smiles, and he does these big hand motions. He's like watching like a Methodist preacher, right? Who's very into his congregation and very kind of social gospel oriented kind of guy, and he does a lot of this stuff. And when women see that, a lot of his body language is friendly and approachable, whereas JD Vance is very stoic. He doesn't smile hardly at all, and he speaks almost monotone when he speaks, right? And so what is it that women will say? My wife says it all the time, right? It's not what you say, it's your tone, right? She doesn't like the tone. And I think that we're living in a culture of tone right now. This is where Trump gets in trouble. His tone is terrible for most women. They don't like his tone. They think that he comes off as being too arrogant and too aggressive and too mean. Kamala, for a lot of women, and by the way, for a fair number of men as well, let's be fair, they like her tone. They like the fact that she is regurgitating the things that Trump says and the policies Trump had, but she says it in this sing-songy way of delivering the line. Now, you said earlier you think that she's an empty vessel. I would go further than that, and I don't say this about a lot of people because I think it's almost low-hanging fruit. But I do believe that Kamala Harris is dumb, right? I don't say that to be mean about her. I think she's genuinely dumb. I think she's a dumb person. And I'll tell you how, just being in media, as you and I have been for a long time, how you could probably detect that. When she is in an interview that is favorable to her, right, which is almost every interview she does, because she doesn't do interviews with anyone who's going to challenge her. But even when she does those, Lester Holt or someone from The View, right? If they ask her any question that challenges her position, she's frozen. Obama, I think, is probably the best candidate maybe ever in history in terms of being able to sit in front of people, even people who challenge him, and respond in a way where he seems just unflustered and unfettered by it. He was incredibly good at it. She's the opposite. She has friendly media asking her very soft questions, and she gets flustered and she freezes. Remember the interview with Lester Holt about the border, where she's saying over and over how we've been to the border, and he says, "You haven't been to the border. I haven't been to Europe. What's your point?" Like, she gets angry. And I think that's the sign of someone who has very low intelligence. I think that Kamala Harris is a product of the moment, and she's a product of the right people seeing her as useful. She is what Hillary Clinton referred to Tulsi Gabbard as, and others as a useful idiot. That's what she is. She's a useful idiot that the Democratic Party brought in. And I believe this, I'll say it to you, I think you might agree or disagree. I don't think she was the candidate. I don't think the Obamas wanted her. The Obamas wanted Michelle Obama to run. That was their actual setup, and that was their plan. And it was the Clintons who screwed it all up. Remember that as soon as it looked like Joe Biden wasn't going to be in, what happened? Bill and Hillary Clinton came out and endorsed Kamala Harris long before the Obamas did. They jumped in and they ruined that game for the Obamas. And they picked someone who I think Barack Obama believed was not intelligent enough to win, but he knew that Michelle was. And that's how they screwed it up for him.
I disagree slightly because I don't think Michelle wanted it. I think if Michelle wanted it, she would have had it. I think that the Obamas put Kamala in that position because she is much easier to control and she will further their agenda. I think if Democrats actually had their way, they would have put in a Shapiro or a Gavin Newsom, two men that can actually speak well and regardless of their policies can communicate well. But I think they were left with Kamala because they were backed into a corner and the Obamas thought, great, we'll get her elected and then we'll just keep running things and we can keep our hands clean because we're not necessarily elected, but we're going to continue the work that we've been doing to destroy this country. But I agree with you. And she gets angry when she's questioned at all. And then another one of the things that she does is she laughs really inappropriately. And I think that some people take verbal pauses. They say they say they take a long time to find their next word. Kamala laughs because she doesn't know what to do next. And that's going to be interesting tomorrow night. I think they've told her to tone down the laughing, but you can only go so far. I brought up at the beginning of the show the New York Times report that said that she's spending all week preparing for this, much of last week preparing for this in a hotel, and she's got somebody dressed up like Trump in like kind of a bulky suit and a long tie, and it's trying to, I guess, simulate what it's going to be to debate against Donald Trump. That goes back to your point. I think if you have to have somebody that looks and sounds like Donald Trump, that tells me that you don't have a grasp of your policies at all. What does it matter if the person's a Trump impersonator at this point?
Right. Well, I think there's another reason for that too, though. I think the reason for that is less about the policies and how is she going to debate him on policy. I suspect that she's not going to really debate him on policy. I think she's going to say a whole lot of things that don't make a lot of sense. It's like she's been doing on the campaign trail, these stump speeches. There's no details in anything, right? Everything is. I just saw a commercial yesterday watching football, right? And a commercial comes on and she says, people need to be able to pay their rent and afford a car. We're going to make sure that happens. What? Like, afford a car? Like, what is that? And how are you going to do that? There's no ever an explanation for anything, right? It's things that sound good. It's everybody wants popsicles. So let's just give everybody popsicles. And people are like, yay, popsicles. But she's not going to tell you how she's going to give them to you. And we know politicians have done this for a long time. But she's doing it to a degree that we've never seen before because she's not actually doing it, right? It's the apparatus around her that has put her in this position. But going back to the Trump thing, why have somebody who looks like Trump, dressed up like Trump? Like you said, it's all about optics. I think what you probably have in that room beside her are all these media consultants who are sitting there saying, nope, you don't want to make this face at him, or you don't want to look at him this way, or you want to stand this way. You want to project power, and everything's about appearance because that's what this entire campaign is. None of her campaign is about policy. None of her campaign is about what she'll actually do for the American people or what she's done in the past, or the fact that not a single vote's ever been cast for this woman. But instead, it's all about optics. How do we make it look like you're the right candidate? How do we make you look strong next to Trump? How do we make it look competent next to Trump? How do we prevent you from cackling your way through certain answers? And by the way, on the laughing thing, have you seen the soundbite? I'm sure you have, when she's talking about being woke. It's always good to be more woke, never less woke. The thing that stands out about that moment to me is if you watch that clip, there are three women sitting around her asking these questions, and she's laughing hysterically, and no one else is laughing. Like the interviewers who are sitting around her are not laughing. Talk about not being able to read the room. So I think you're right. When it's a defense mechanism, it's a way of buying time. When you're still laughing as a communicator and no one else is either laughing or even smiling, they're keeping that, and you keep going with it, either you're insane or you're just trying to buy time until they can change the subject and move on. It's almost like she might as well cackle and someone holds up a sign that says next question, because that's actually what she's saying. She doesn't want to answer this one, so I'm just going to laugh until it becomes uncomfortable.
Yep, like I said, run the clock. And that is, in my opinion, going to be the strategy tomorrow night as they get an allotted amount of time. It's 90 minutes. So what she's going to try to do is say as little actual content as possible and spend a lot of time, and hopefully, she's hoping that he says something nasty about her so she can spend time marinating in that, and again running the clock so she doesn't have to say a whole lot about policy. There's one thing that I think a lot of American families want to hear from Kamala besides just the economy and inflation and all that. I think there's a lot of even these suburban women out there that might like Kamala, but I think one thing that Kamala needs to be asked about is transgender surgeries for minors. And if you support, which Tim Walz did, having a trans refuge state in Minnesota where parents don't even need to consent to this, that you can have this trans refuge, which I consider to be state-sponsored child abuse. She needs to be asked about that. She needs to be asked about men and women's sports. And I know that they're probably going to bring up, oh, you don't want to ban AR-15s, but you want to ban books. Well, here's Tim Walz with another one of those canned lines. I'm sure Kamala's going to use it too. But here he is talking about how important it is to have gay porn in school libraries.
And we did something a little bit. We banned banning books, especially banning LGBTQ books for themes in that.
How important do you think that the social issue part of this is going to be? We know they've got abortion on lock. They're always going to. But there's another half of this social issue area that I think conservatives and Donald Trump can win in, and that's one of them.
I think you're right. And I think that would be an extremely smart thing for Trump to do in his campaign to do, right? Is instead of just focusing on economic issues, which is a big one, it is a big one, but you have to start to contrast with her on social issues that make people feel like she's not one of us, because that's what she's doing on the abortion issue. The entire abortion issue is her campaign saying, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump are weird, right? They're not like us. They're not for abortion, which as if the entire nation is for abortion. But there's this very specific group of people, obviously, they're targeting with that. And again, those suburban moms, right, that they're really going after. But the reality is, yes, those same suburban moms have very strong feelings about men in women's sports, have very strong feelings about transgender reassignment surgery and gender reassignment. The fact that Tim Walz, yes, made Minnesota a trans refuge state and enshrined it in law so that even if a child crosses the border and their parents have a court order in another state saying this child cannot receive reassignment surgery, by law in the state of Minnesota, they have to perform the surgery. That's insane. And that does not align with the values of 99.9% of Americans. Most Americans are not for that, but no one's talking about it, right? So he's got to bring those issues up during this debate and say, when she says my values have not changed, well, let's talk about some of those values. And are you for this? And pin her down. Don't just let her give you this long-winded answer about I believe in the rights of everyone. No. Let's be specific, right? Because what does that ultimately look like? Yes, abortion is an issue that a lot of people have strong feelings on. But the other reality is that Trump needs to not only do that, but position himself not specifically on the issue of abortion, I don't think, but instead make the point that you're being lied to, that you're being told over and over what his positions are. I was president for 4 years. There was no national ban on abortion. There was no attempt on my part. So why are you believing this lie that if I'm reelected, now suddenly I'm going to do something that I had the power to supposedly do before and never even attempted, right? And so I think Trump needs to make that case for himself while challenging her on the fact that she has a record and she has a running mate who has a record, and he's got to challenge her on it.
And I don't find him folksy at all. I find him, to use his own word, weird. Like, he's the definition of weird, in my opinion. He personally gives me the creeps. And so does his wife, who wants to open up the windows and smell the riot in the air. I mean, that's weird to me. But another extreme position that Kamala once had is mandatory gun buybacks. And, I do give some of the mainstream media a slight, tiny little bit of credit for at least asking the question, not of Kamala herself, she won't sit down, but for surrogates of hers and other elected Democrats. So this was the question about Kamala's prior comments on mandatory gun buybacks. And maybe this is a little revealing. Let's take a listen to Raphael Warnock on this subject.
Should she also be, in your opinion, supporting a mandatory gun buyback program?
Listen, we're not going to be able to get where we need to go without action in Congress. We've got to pass some laws to deal with this. Yet I hear politicians say that it's not guns who kill people, it's people who kill people. And yet we don't even want to know who those people are. We won't even support.
Senator, just yes or no, though, should she support the mandatory buyback program? Just a yes or no.
Listen, look, as a pastor, I've done buyback programs. You can pick this issue or that issue. But I think that, again, there's not one single thing that will make all of this go away.
Oh, so he kind of skirted around the question. It's so funny how when they're actually asked on a mainstream platform about it, they don't want to give a solid answer. But then when they're at other events, they'll proudly proclaim that we need mandatory buybacks. They'll proudly proclaim they want an assault weapons ban. But do you think, obviously in the wake of the horrible tragedy in Georgia last week, do you think that this conversation is going to rev back up? It was one of the top issues in past elections. It really hasn't been in the last several years. But do you think tomorrow night that's going to be a question?
The issue will definitely come up, and the term that will be used will be comprehensive gun reform, comprehensive reform on assault weapons. We need an assault weapons ban. She'll probably say that, right? Because people don't even know what an assault weapon is, and it all sounds good. And Trump will probably say something to the effect of, this isn't the issue. There's other comprehensive issues we need to look at. And I think they'll ultimately blow past it, because the truth is there is no good answer to it, because it's not an honest debate. There's been no honest debate about gun buybacks in this country, about what assault weapons are, what assault weapon bans look like, about the issues of mental health issues associated with school shooters and mass shooters, the pharmaceutical issues associated with it. We don't have those honest discussions. So I think they'll blow past it pretty quickly. And honestly, the one reason they'll blow past it is because neither candidate really wants to talk about it. They'll talk about it to the amount that's, I hate this term, but dog whistles to their own constituents, but not really in any kind of depth, because no one wants to put a finger on it. Raphael Warnock, who, by the way, is the senator who represents me here in Georgia. I'm in Atlanta right now. Didn't blink through that entire exchange. If you watch him, I mean, it's pretty amazing that he was able to hold that stare without blinking even once. He's thinking so hard, how do I not do this? And the reality is that she has indicated before that she wants gun buybacks. She wants to take those weapons by force if necessary. Because remember, when they say mandatory gun buybacks, they're talking about mass confiscation. And then after they've confiscated your weapon, the government deciding what you get in return for that. That's what they're actually talking about. Now, is that ever going to happen? No, it's never going to happen. But that's something you say on the campaign trail when you're running in 2020 or 2019, because you desperately want votes. You can't even get 2% of the Democratic primary, but it lays there on the ash heap of your campaign. She was never planning to do it. She was never going to do it. So does she have the value where she'd like to do it? Yes, but it's not a reality. I think that her bigger problem is not the issue of guns. The bigger issue is that nothing she has said in the past holds true to this moment. And the past wasn't 30 years ago. The past wasn't even 10 years ago. It was 3.5 years ago when you were running for president of the United States. You had a set of positions that were very specific. And now you're saying, none of those are my positions. And while everyone gives her credit and says, well, okay, but that's what politicians do. One thing that has made Trump unique in the political landscape is that Trump does not just say what people want him to say. He comes out and says what his position will be, whether it's popular or not. And what's amazing, if we go back to 2016, 2015, when he ran the first time, he was talking about issues that are now the mainstays of today's election that no one talked about at the time. No one was talking border. No one was talking immigration. No one was talking about NAFTA. No one was talking about U.S. jobs and China's supremacy. They weren't talking about any of those things. And today, it's the center of every campaign for president 8 years later. So I think that's a testament to the fact that the people who like Trump like the fact that he doesn't just do what candidates do, promise one thing and then do another when you get in office. The question will be, do independents see her for what she actually is? Because that's the real constituency that we have to be looking at.
And do they really buy that she's suddenly become moderate? That's what really gets me. but they're doing their best. And, they got the best people in the business spinning this web. Speaking of people who just don't like Trump, it's amazing to me that not only that certain folks like Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney are now suddenly for Kamala. Mitt Romney says he won't vote for Trump. Mike Pence won't vote for Donald Trump. You got all these people that just now hate Donald Trump or have hated Donald Trump. Okay, gotcha.
Makes
whatever.
you feel better about Donald Trump.
Yeah. But what's more interesting to me is to watch the mainstream media suddenly fall in love with Dick Cheney and Mitt Romney and, of course, John McCain before that. But now, all of a sudden, these liberal progressives are falling all over themselves in favor of Dick Cheney and even Kamala herself. Let's take a listen.
Liz Cheney and Dick Cheney have endorsed you. What do you think?
I'm honored to have their endorsement, and I think that what they both, as leaders who are well respected, are making an important statement that it's okay, and if not important, to put country above party. And I'm honored to have their support. It really reinforces for them that we love our country and we have more in common than what separates us.
She's honored to have the support of the Cheneys. If you would have told somebody even 10 years ago that you'd have a liberal, progressive Democrat candidate saying that she respects and honors the endorsement of a Cheney, what do you make of this? And do you think it moves the needle at all? I don't.
Well, no, I mean, there's not a single Republican other than maybe Adam Kinzinger who cares about Dick Cheney's endorsement or Liz Cheney's endorsement, right? Nobody cares. But the irony of it is this, and Tommy, I think I'm a little bit older than you are, but if you go back 20 years to 2004, there are only two words ever used to describe Dick Cheney by the media: war criminal. That's all they ever called this man. And by the way, he is a war criminal. This is a guy who had stock in Halliburton, who sent our troops to die in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, who his company was making so much money from that, and he continued to receive money as a result of owning stock in Halliburton. It was an enormous scandal for so many years. Liberal media, mainstream media despised Dick Cheney. They saw him as a man who over 1 million Iraqis died as a result of this war that was based on lies. And yet, today, they say, well, we're honored by his endorsement because he's a well-respected leader. He's a well-respected leader. If Kamala Harris had been in office at the time, she would have been calling for UN and The Hague to have a trial for him, which, by the way, many liberals did at the time. And by the way, The Hague and the UN did at the time, right? They were saying George Bush, Dick Cheney, these guys are war criminals. And the reality is that talk about how you resolve your image in our country today. If you are a guy like George W. Bush or Dick Cheney, who was responsible for the most bungled wars in American history, responsible for trillions of dollars, not just in terms of the cost of those wars, but the aftermath for those soldiers and their families ongoing for generations. And you look at those guys and say, how do we fix that image? Endorse a Democrat. And then all of a sudden, you're a great leader. You're a well-respected leader and a hell of a painter, George Bush. That's what they turn you into. And you become this media darling, and it's insane that you forgot all the things that, by the way, were legitimate things to be angry about. You were legitimately angry about these wars. You were legitimately, or at least you said you were, legitimately angry about the profits that these people were making on these wars. And now suddenly they're just well-respected leaders who they put country above party. Do they really? Is that how we see them? So I think it's almost laughable that the characters that have come out in support of her are the most ridiculous lineup of characters to support her. She should be running from those endorsements. She should actually be running from those people and saying, I want nothing to do with it. But again, she doesn't, I doubt she knows even 5 facts about Dick Cheney.
That's probably true. I also think that their disdain for Donald Trump, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, rhinos, they hate Donald Trump so much that they will compromise all of their actually deeply held values because they hate him that much. And you got to be skeptical of those people because under Donald Trump, you had no new wars and you had relative peace around the world. So the people that don't want that, they're now in favor of Kamala Harris. But they also make a lot of money off of endless wars. So, I don't know. To me, that's all adding up. Final question for you. Tomorrow night, how big of a difference do you think it's going to make one way or another in the polls? If Donald Trump has a great night, or if Kamala has a great night, or if they both have bad nights, you think it makes much of a difference to the American people?
Honestly, I guess the question is, do you even trust the polls at all? I actually don't trust the polls. I think the polls are heavily skewed in order to build favorability for Kamala Harris without her actually having that favorability. But I think, will the debate be that important? Probably not overall. I think we'll know how bad of a night she has based on whether she's willing to do another one. If she has a really bad night and he makes her look really foolish, chances are they'll want to do another debate to give her a do-over. If she barely gets by and the media is going to say she won no matter what happens, right? No matter what happens, they're going to say she won. Just like no matter what happened in the first debate, they were going to say that Biden lost because they were setting them up to get kicked out. But the reality is that does it really move the needle? No. I think the only thing that might move the needle is if Trump comes off in a more statesman-like way and is able to make her look foolish on her positions. If she looks bad on her positions, and I agree with you, Tomi, man, call the campaign, tell them, talk about social issues. Don't hide from those things because he has a very strong case. If he could make some of those points, I think he would actually come out ahead.
I think he also needs to avoid something that he really enjoys doing, and that's the art of exaggeration, because every time he exaggerates something, the media says it's a lie. He lied 200 times because he says something like, my crowds are the biggest crowds, or I have the most beautiful border wall. And they go, that's a lie. It's not the most beautiful. So he exaggerates and they count it as a lie. It's disingenuous and it's BS, but they're going to do it. So if he maybe doesn't go out there and say, I've been the best president since Abraham Lincoln for black people, he should probably try to avoid that, because the people that are going to kind of half-heartedly watch the debate afterwards, they're going to say, well, Trump lied all these times, and they're going to believe that without understanding that the lies are actually just an exaggeration for effect, which is what he often does. We'll wait and see. I mean,
it doesn't need to.
He's going to be himself, and love him or hate him, I guess you have somebody that's at least genuine. I hope that he maybe tones it down a little bit, but we'll wait and see. She's going to be her own worst enemy. So I guess let's hope that the debate preparations with the Donald Trump stand-in are doing well for her. Best of luck to her. You know, he's already ended one candidate. Maybe he can end another. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll be back soon and we'll have some more discussions.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Ben. All right. There is no other way to put it. The mass illegal immigration we've experienced in the last 3.5 years will bankrupt and destroy America. Mass and swift deportation is the only answer. It's time for final thoughts. So the truth is, we could shut down the border tomorrow and allow not one single more person in, and we'd still be cooked. Prior to the Biden-Harris open border mass migration, we had conservatively estimated about 20 to 30 million illegal immigrants in this country. In a matter of years, again, conservatively, they've allowed 10 million plus. They've crossed the Rio Grande, they've crossed the Arizona desert, they've run ashore in San Diego, they've come in through our northern border. Millions have evaded any detection whatsoever, and hundreds of thousands have been flown in through a CBP app. And you take that 10 million plus, and then account for the fact that millions of those will have already had kids or they're going to have kids. And like I said, we're cooked, because that's healthcare, schooling, public safety, services, housing assistance, meal assistance, and more. We are taking care of the population equivalent of a medium-sized country, and there's no end in sight. You think one of these days these people are just going to be self-sufficient? How? The United States of America can't afford this. In the sanctuary city of New York, the city's Department of Homeless Services has already handed out $4,000 to 150 migrant families to entice them out of city shelters and into permanent housing, which I'd assume the taxpayers are also going to subsidize. But not only are they being given this $4,000 grant, eligible migrant families can also get up to $1,000 additional in gift cards for household necessities and moving expenses. But what happens when that money runs out? Then who pays? The migrants? With what? Do American homeless people have these kind of perks? After the illegals finish sucking the system dry, what's left for our own citizens, for the veterans, for the elderly folks on a fixed income who can barely afford to live as it is? But it's not just New York. Look at flipping Colorado. Venezuelan gangs are ravaging Aurora, and Democrat politicians tell you to stop imagining it because these illegals are just newcomers after all.
any population, you'll have very small subsets of folks that don't follow the rules, and we hold those folks accountable. We actually know historically it's always true that we have lower levels of crime around migrants than we do among our general population. So there's a risk of misperception somehow this population is more dangerous, causing more trouble. That's just factually not true, but we are aware of it. We have overt and covert operations going every day to intervene, and where we know there are risks, we're going to be aggressive about making arrests, about pressing charges, and if needing, deporting folks. But I think the much bigger risk is that you'll have a perception that all of the newcomers in the city are dangerous, and nothing could be farther from the truth.
The perception is the biggest risk. So if you get raped or assaulted by a newcomer, you should be comforted to know that statistically it wasn't likely, and given the odds, it probably won't happen to you again, maybe someone else. Just roll the dice. Love, tolerance, inclusion. No, this is insanity. And that same little turd mayor of Denver, well, he's mulling over the idea of turning an empty elementary school into yet another migrant shelter. And what about the poor people in the town of Springfield, Ohio? A town of about 60,000 people has been saddled with roughly 20,000 illegals in the last 4 years. Care to take a guess how it's working out?
I live at 426 Northwestern Avenue. Miss Skinner, who I'm not trying to put on the spot, is my neighbor.
Just talk to me, ma'am. Thank you so much.
And I'm done with what I'm seeing. It is so unsafe in my neighborhood anymore. I have the homeless that were trying to camp out, and I have made concessions with them, and I try to help them the best I can to keep them from trying to squat on my property. But it is so unsafe. I have men that cannot speak English in my front yard screaming at me, throwing mattresses in my front yard, throwing trash in my front yard. And I can't. Look at me, I weigh 95 pounds. I couldn't defend myself if I had to. My husband is elderly, and last night, after living in this home for 45 years, he said, Noelle, guess what? It's time to pack up and move. He said, we can't do this anymore. He said, it's killing both of us mentally. I don't understand what you expect of us as citizens. I mean, I understand they're here under temporary protected status, and you're protecting them, and I understand that our city services are overwhelmed and understaffed. But who's protecting us? If we're protecting them, who's protecting me? I want out of this town. I am sorry. Please give me a reason to stay. Thank you.
That is Kamala's America. U.S. citizens begging for sovereignty over their own damn yards, begging to feel somewhat safe in their own neighborhoods, begging. Residents also report Haitian migrants are not only decapitating and eating fowl from the city parks, but also family pets. You know, it's all fun and games until they start eating Fluffy. Cat ladies for Kamala, am I right? Where does this end? I don't know, but I can tell you it doesn't end well. You think this country can take care of millions of additional people and their families and not go bust? Newsflash, if you allow these illegals to work, that means at least 10 million foreign workers competing with American workers, and they'll work for less. They'll drive down wages, and guess what? Even if they work, they will still get assistance from the almighty government teat. So while they take your jobs and drive down your wages, they'll still use your tax dollars to subsidize the rest. And if they don't work, the taxpayers will be on the hook for all of it. Joe and Kamala have put us in this position, and mass deportation is the only way out. And even that isn't going to completely solve this problem. Now, just imagine Kamala becomes our president and lets in another 10 million. We might as well take a one-way ticket to the moon at that point. No one wants to talk about it, but it's the hard truth. Even if these millions of illegal immigrants are just here for a better life and don't commit crime, steal, traffic, rape, and pillage, which some of them do, we will still, best case scenario, bankrupt our cities, taking care of them and all that comes with it. We are at the mercy of millions of illegals. Joe and Kamala put us in this position, and now we will spend the next decade trying to dig out if it's even possible. This is the election issue, and it should be pretty damn obvious who does not deserve your vote. The person who helped make this nightmare our lived reality. Those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in tomorrow live at 1 p.m. Eastern. Also catch full episodes of this show on Fox Nation whenever you want. Please like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.